Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Paul Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries, based here in Stonington. And welcome to the third in our Lunch and Learn series. In past years, you would have been in this room that I'm sitting in right now on Stonington Harbor, enjoying our speakers in person. However, as many of us have had to adjust, we've taken to using a webinar tool for doing this. And this is the third one. I think we've shaken out a bunch of the bugs on it. They worked out pretty well. We've had good feedback from many of you probably, and others who have attended the last couple of them. We'll do these the last Friday of each month, right through October, I think. The next one, by the way, will be August the 28th, and it's about aquaculture with a panel of aquaculture folks from this part of the state of Maine talking about how they're operating and how they fit into our working waterfront. Just real quickly before I introduce Libby, the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries is here to help sustain commercial fisheries and the communities that depend on them. And we're a science-based organization doing a lot of engagement work with communities, primarily with fishermen, and helping to bridge the gap and connect them with scientists, regulators, and other stakeholders in the area. We're a small non-governmental organization. We like to think we're a little nonprofit doing really big things. So thanks for joining us. Dr. Libby Jewett is Director of the Ocean Acidification Program at NOAA, part of the Office of Atmospheric Research. And she'll tell you a little bit more about herself, but we're very pleased to have her on our board of directors and an active occasional resident here of Stonington. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Libby Jewett.
All right, thank you, Paul. And just gonna jump right into it. So Paul gave you a little bit of background. I work at NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I was the founding director of the Ocean Acidification Program, and that's a story for another day. If you'd like to know more about ocean acidification, you can chat some questions about it. I do sit on the board of the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries, and I will say that it's because of those connections through MCCF that the idea for this project that I'll be telling you about today came about. And I want to send a particular shout out to Carla, who is also sitting there in the other room and will be helping me field questions, because it was through her connections and the trust that the broader lobster fishing community has in her that really made this project possible. I have spent every summer of my life on the rocky coast of mid-coast Maine here in Stonington. I own a house here and I would like to retire here. So what is this project about? The goal of the work that I'll be telling you about today is to bring more Maine lobster fishermen and women into the right whale conservation conversation. I worked with NOAA's Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and they accepted my request to do this project with and for them. And they were many people there I continue to collaborate with to this day. I spent and did the bulk of this work throughout the month of December, which of course is short because of the holidays in Maine, interviewing and both lobstermen and women and others associated with the industry. So just to prove that I actually was here in December, this is a picture of the Quoddy Head Lighthouse, which is the furthest east point in the US. In the middle of winter, I think it was about maybe 5 degrees when I was there, and this is the morning that I was interviewing folks starting in Cutler, Maine. So overall, I interviewed 14 lobstermen and women from Portland to Cutler, including one state rep who's a fisherwoman and another fisherwoman who was challenging her seat, who may or may not be attending today. A major lobster distributor, 5 Maine DMR scientists, actually probably more than that, a couple of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute scientists, many Northeast Fisheries Science Center scientists, and the executive director of the Maine Lobstermen Association. So, and this is over 2 weeks. These are wide, long-ranging conversations in people's homes, in my home, in restaurants, near people. I made every effort to make it easy for fishermen who other issues may be arising in their lives and in their fishing, in order to make it possible to interview them. And I am just so thankful to all of them who met with me. So we're going to use a little advanced technology here and ask you, why are you tuned in? We're going to do a poll, which I think Carla is going to initiate right now. So go ahead and vote. Ooh, okay, we got one. And you can choose multiple ones. We didn't say that, but you can choose as many as pertain to you. We got a bunch in resource management, yay. Friends and family, thank you for joining. All right. Not too many fishermen, but given the beautiful day, I think they're probably out fishing, so to be expected. All right, I'll leave it up to you, Carla, if you, looks like things are sort of, yes, me too. All right. So once that, do I get rid of it or you? I think we can, I'm just gonna minimize. We've seen the results. All right. Okay, maybe it's still in that mode. Okay, so the first part of my talk, I want to cover obviously some information about the status of the North Atlantic right whales. But before I do that, I have another question. Question number 2, and then the last one will come at the end. So why are they called right whales? And we have a couple of answers here. You have to choose one. All right, here we go. Let's see, people. It looks like, all right. Looks like, all right. Just give a few more seconds. Looks like people know. So the reason that they were called the right whale is because in whaling times, they were relatively, I guess, on the spectrum, easier to catch because they swim slowly, they float when killed, and live relatively close to shore. So they could pull the dead whale up to the edge of the ship and do their rendering of the blubber and whatever else they were going to extract. So that was the right answer, and good job. All right, people. Obviously, very informed folks on the line. So we're going to keep going. All right. So as the reason for all of the work that we're doing is North Atlantic right whales are in trouble. I'm just going to go through some basic stats about that. First, the North Atlantic right whale is one of 3 right whale species. There's one in the Southern Atlantic, as well as another in the North Pacific. Right now, they're only, by all estimates, or actually as of 2018, the estimate was that there are 412 individuals left, which was down from about 483 in 2010. And I was trying to look for what we think it was way back before whaling, and the closest I get was thousands, but obviously a lot more than we have now. Of those, there are likely less than 100 reproductive females, and whereabouts of most of the population are unknown for most of the year. And I'll explain why we're having, why our understanding of their whereabouts is actually getting more complicated. They have really never recovered from whaling, although their numbers were higher, but started dropping in 2010. In 2019, as part of there has what we're calling an unusual mortality event that's lasted basically from 2017 to 2020. But in 2019, there were 10 known mortalities, mostly recovered in Canadian waters. This past winter, which is good news, there were 10 new calves born, although 2 have been hit by vessels. 1 was killed and washed up off New Jersey, I think that's right. And the other one was injured and is presumed dead, so not good. Over 88% of known deaths have been caused by vessel strike or entanglement in fishing gear. So I'm not going to go in. There's a lot of people who know a lot more about all of that, but I just wanted to give a quick treatment of the status. There are also a number of legal protections for endangered species, in particular marine mammals. The Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act are 2 very, very strong pieces of legislation with strong legal protections for whales. If any of you have heard about the TRT, or Take Reduction Team process, which was a big deal in this region last spring and actually lasting to now, but the actual process was happening in spring of 2019, is a process that it comes out of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So I'm not going to go into all of that. You could spend a whole talk on all of the legal aspects of this topic. There are also parallel series of lawsuits that have been brought from a number of NGOs, and there's been news in the paper relatively recently about that. And just recently, the North Atlantic right whale was listed as critically endangered on the International Union for Conservation of Nature red list. That's not official through the Endangered Species Act, but also important to note. So what I would like to talk about now is how this intersection between the North Atlantic right whale and lobster fishery is also a climate change story. So the Gulf of Maine, this region is actually, the oceans in the Gulf of Maine are warming faster than just about anywhere on the planet, ocean-wise. And this is causing all sorts of changes in this region, including the fact that the major lobster distributions abundances are now sort of off this region versus being off Massachusetts. So the lobsters are changing distributions, but I'm actually not gonna cover that, but it's important to appreciate that. This is a story that starts with a very, very small plankton species called Calanus finmarchicus, which is a very tiny copepod. And this is important because it's one of the primary food species that the North Atlantic right whale consumes. Now, how does a big whale like that consume a tiny individual like this? Well, they're filter feeding whales. They have baleen and they trap the tiny species as they move through the water. So their abundances used to be very, very high in the Bay of Fundy. And in the last decade or so, because of the changing temperatures of water, likely the abundances of Calanus are now very high in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, higher than in the Bay of Fundy. So here we have the whales. So they actually range from Florida up to Canada, but they spend springtime in large aggregations off of Cape Cod. And many of you may have had the opportunity to see them there. And traditionally, when those abundances of copepods were very high in the Bay of Fundy, the whales would migrate up and be found in large numbers in the Bay of Fundy. But now, with the changing distributions of the copepods, the whales are trying to figure out where they are, but the whales are now being found in greater abundances after that sort of springtime, sort of now, summertime in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And so obviously this is a new region, it's a different country, and there are various aspects that are gonna need to be taken into account. So, so now we have the lobster industry, which is also changing. As I said, the predominant numbers are now happening off of this region. I'm sort of looking out the window here from Stonington. And but the lobster fishermen who traditionally, way back have been fishing more coastally, because of various changes in the ecosystem, are now actually fishing not only here, but actually quite far out into the Gulf of Maine. And this is obviously a perfect storm where they're fishing. Also, the whales are perhaps moving through these areas. So that could lead to greater entanglement. So now Maine lobster fishery, just a few stats about that. This is a very important industry for Maine, particularly important for places like here in Stonington. This is a graph which is showing millions of pounds of landings of lobster over time since 1950, I think that says, up to 2019. So we have the lobster landings in the gray, and then the line going up is actual value. And so those aren't exactly correlated because it depends on the value of the fishery, whether, you can have a disconnect, I guess. As the fishery becomes more valuable, then the value per pound goes up. But in 2018, the value was, I believe, at its highest, around 491 million at the dock side. And then if you add on the distribution and the restaurants and serving lobsters and all of that sort of add-on value in the economy, you get to a much higher number. And I estimated, and I may not be right, that it represents about 2% of the Maine economy. And so here is just a download from a DMR graphic, which is showing where lobster landings are greatest. And you can see Stonington right there, kind of Deer Isle, that has the largest landings. And then I believe that is Vinyl Haven. So that's one of the other ports with the highest landings in the region. So you can see how important it is for coastal communities, especially communities like Stonington and Vinyl Haven. So now we'll get to the meat of the issue, which are the ropes. And sometimes I'll say ropes, sometimes I'll say lines. For those of you who are fishermen or sailors, you'll remember that lines mean ropes. But I just want to make sure that folks know that if I say lines, I'm also talking about ropes. For those who are not familiar with lobster fishing, just want to give you a quick sort of heads up about how lobster fishing happens, and how traps are sort of aligned and what the different terms are. And so these lines that go from the first trap up to the buoys are called the end lines. And so this is a trap trawl that has 2 end lines. And you'll see that we have only 2 traps on here. Actually, most fishermen who fish in the coastal zone near coast who fish 2 traps would only have 1 end line. But when you get out into the deeper waters where you could have up to 15 traps or maybe 30 traps on a trawl, then you definitely want, or most have a second end line so they can, figure out exactly how the traps are oriented and have the opportunity to actually haul the traps from either side. I do want to note in this graphic again that it notes here the kinds of line that have to be on the, have to be part of the trawls. And sinking ground line was instituted, again, I'd probably get this wrong, but around 2010 when when there was important TRT conservation measures being instituted, or as far as I know, all the Maine fishermen are required to have the sinking ground line between the traps. And then also have weak links up near the buoys so that the buoys detach from the line. And there's additional conversation, which I won't go into later, about adding additional weak links further down in the line. That's part of the conversation that's happening right now. So what are the options for reducing risk? Less lines, and I'll be going into more detail about ropeless fishing, trawling up, other ways to have less end lines, perhaps fish less traps. I'm not going to go into the details about actual closures. There is, I could share about that, but I just can't cover everything today. I also want to talk about the effort to understand and know where the whales are as a way to mitigate risk around them, sort of that conversation. That was an important conversation to have. Now, finally, Maine gear marking, that's also a whole nother thing that is actually coming into effect, I believe, in September, where all of the Maine fishermen, or I think it's all of the Maine fishermen, have to have purple twine markers in their line, so that then if a whale shows up entangled, they could actually determine where that whale was entangled, as a way of determining, is it Maine, is it Rhode Island, is it Massachusetts, is it Canada? Because whales, once they become entangled, can actually move pretty far, and then you don't know exactly where they were entangled. In terms of the ropeless, this is obviously a controversial topic, and I say ropeless in that there's less rope in the water column when we have these ropeless technologies deployed, but there still is rope involved, so just want to make that clear. There are a couple of different systems, some of which I was actually able to see, that are being considered. One is the idea that you'd have a compressed air, you'd have a bag that was basically sitting in the trap with a compressed air bottle next to it, and the fisherman would come along and ping it, it would fill with air and lift that trap to the surface. So there'd be no line in the water in between the time they deploy and they come back. There's another idea where well, you don't bring the whole trap to the surface, where you have the rope and the buoy sitting down in the trap, held down, and then the fisherman comes along, pings it, and it acoustically releases, and the buoy now goes to the surface, and they haul it like a regular trap, the way they do now. Similarly, instead of the rope sitting in a basket, it could sit on a spool. So that's another idea that's being debated. And then finally, a very less expensive option is biodegradable twine. Fisheries on the West Coast are actually playing around with this, that would be tested, like, to, once it was wrapped around some part, to keep, basically wrapped around to keep the rope down on the trap. But as it's sitting down there, it's degrading, and then at some point it pops up. So no one's controlling this now, but it has to be sort of tested very well for the waters and the temperatures and all of that. But at least the line would be down for a certain period of time, and then hopefully would be up by the time the fisherman comes around to fish that again. So just throwing out the various ideas that I've come across. So interview findings, ropeless. Actually, this is a picture of the cage idea, where the rope is actually sitting coiled in a cage with a buoy on top, and then has an acoustic release here. And so you ping it, it opens up, the whole thing goes to the surface. Actually, the top of the trap and the line inside go to the surface, and then you haul it like a regular trap. So in terms of, I spelled ropeless. That's not good. Should say ropeless, not ropless technologies. So in terms of responses from fishermen, so these are some of the responses I got. Well, it's illegal to set traps without lung lines. I mean, that is true. So that's obviously something we're gonna have to work on. Way too expensive. I estimated, with the help of one of the fishermen, that for the number of trawls that they might have offshore, where they would have 2 end lines, it would cost about between $280,000 and $350,000 per boat to outfit them with the current technologies. One guy said, I'm out fishing in very challenging conditions, especially in the middle of winter. And he went and he put these, his big fishing gloves on. He says, how am I going to deal with deploying these systems that require you to be able to actually touch things with your fingers with these gloves on? Good point. Very good point. Many said, this is just going to be a mess of trawls being set over each other if we can't know exactly how other people's trawls are set. This is actually a really, really important part of the thing, or part of aspect of this work that needs to be worked out for sure. And what if the first trap flips over? Now think about the way that thing deployed. If it flips over, it's not going to deploy. So got to figure that out. Others said, and this is because they heard stories of people who'd seen these devices deployed in Australia, it took too long to come to the top. You know, we need to be able to know that it's going to be there when we get there. And if I have to wait for it to come to the top, that's a delay in my fishing. So the issues, as I see it sort of pulling out of that, of course, cost. And one thing I'll say is that older fishermen, not always, but many times, may have more resources than younger fishermen. So they might actually be able to invest in it, but the technology part of it, the younger fishermen are probably more adept with technology versus the old fishermen. So you have this weird disconnect between the cost of the systems, accessibility, and then the use of the technology accessibility. Software and the tracking part of the traps, I'll go into a little more detail on that, but that's an important part of whatever system gets developed. And so one of the things is, in terms of the software, is that given the complexity of how fishermen fish, you would need a software system which could track traps in real time, only show you your traps when you're out of range, show you, well, ideally, which you can't do now with regular fishing, show you everyone's traps when in range, so you don't deploy over top of them, show DMR, Department of Marine Resources, all traps all the time and be able to tell whose traps were whose. And given the system is on the bottom, that tracking system obviously can't be by satellite, so we got to figure that out. And the other fishermen, like scallop fishermen, would also need to know. So they'd also have to be investing in a sort of software tracking. And then the extreme condition situation, how are you going to deploy these systems and repack them or whatever needs to happen when you're out fishing in gale force winds and big waves, and deployment retrieval, we talked about that. And then the psychology of getting over that it's illegal, and it has been for a long time. So some of the solutions that I've been thinking about are, you know, how can we develop something that will actually add value to fisherman experience, like tracking traps in real time, talked about that, and reducing, and could we set up something that right now fishermen don't know, if somebody, they don't know who has been fishing their traps, if in fact, and this apparently does happen, illegal hauling of others' traps. So is there a way to build into the system so that you could know if someone else came and hauled your trap, and when? Definitely involve lobstermen, and particularly, I would say, Maine lobstermen in the development. Can we set up some sort of prize for developing a system that works for them? And we haven't done that. I mean, we, NOAA, but just in general, no one has done that. And I think even the philanthropic community might want to consider that. Bringing the cost down. One fisherman said the cost to instrument the boat for ropeless fishing is more than I have invested in my fishing industry. So obviously need to work on that, maybe subsidize it somehow. And I did hear that fishermen might be willing to fish and try out ropeless fishing. They would fish, let's say, 100 traps, if that was the only way they could fish a full 800. So that would be, oh no, it says internet connection's unstable. Let's hope, let's ignore that. So one of the new initiatives actually is that NOAA has instigated is sort of Google searching on steroids is what it's been called. And it's working with a private company that is looking for, and this is specifically focused on the software aspect that I was talking about. What is out there already that we could institute into this ropeless scenario that would actually make it more appealing to fishermen? So just saying, and if you want more information on that. So another idea, so ropeless, another idea for reducing the number of lines in the water is to trawl up. And so instead of 3 to 15, maybe it's going to be 3 to something much higher number of traps on a trawl. This is the current scenario for, so lobster fishing is managed on a zone level, and that includes fishermen and and then Department of Marine Resources and NOAA people involved in sort of deciding how they're going to institute the fishery in their region. You'll see it's obviously a pretty complicated map. Please note that the different colors actually denote the minimum number of traps that can be fished in particular areas. So I just want to say these numbers will, I don't know, because I'm not in the middle of this, but I'm guessing that those numbers will be going up. So what was the response to Trawling UP? Because folks definitely want to talk about that. They said, well, you know, we're already doing that. Safety concerns definitely rise as you increase the number of traps on a trawl, because you're just pulling up more weight, and so, you know, and so anyway, so that's an issue. At least one person said or clarified to me, if we have bigger trawls to keep them in place and not get washed away by tides and currents and stuff, we're going to need bigger anchors. And if you have bigger anchors, that means more stuff that a whale might be dragging around, if in fact they're dragging around these trawls. And then the last is, many said that this is just going to be a mess of trawls setting over each other the longer the trawls get. So all things that we need to be thinking about. Okay, so this is my second to last topic, which is tracking whales. And I bring this up especially because the first thing I thought was, well, there are 400 whales. Why don't we just put something on them so we know exactly where they are all the time and then try and manage around them? Well, first off, that is easier said than done, but primarily because you can't do more harm to them than has already been done by actually inserting a tracker in them that might lead to infection. So there's a lot about, you know, protecting them and not doing more harm that some actual devices are being tested. But so some of the responses, as I said before, just track every whale. I want proof that measures we are being asked to take will in fact protect the whales, and they won't if the whales are not here, and that's fair enough. I heard NOAA isn't tracking whales in Gulf of Maine because they don't think it's worth it, or they already recognize that the whales are not there. Well, that's not really true, and so I'm going to go into some details about that. I'd be willing to remove my traps when whales are present, and that seemed to be out of this understanding that the belief that the right whales are not around, so they probably wouldn't have to change their behavior or where their traps are, but fair enough. And then I've never seen a right whale. Well, that's likely true because there are very few right whales left. But we do know that the whales are in the greater Gulf of Maine. So I did talk about not safe to put trackers on whales yet. The Navy is actually working on some options for that, but they're testing them on, as far as I understand, on the southern population, not on the North Atlantic right whales. And there are differences between the species of whale that may or may not make those useful. In terms of whales, because whales move, you know, if we know they're in one place one time, that actually dynamically managing around them is pretty hard, because then they may just move right out of that area, and then you've required that people move their gear when in fact the whales aren't there anymore. So I've come to understand that's a really tough ask. And then I want to talk about NOAA is and has been doing overflights in the Gulf of Maine, and then some other efforts to track whales in the Gulf of Maine include using this glider, ocean glider, which has acoustic pinging mechanisms on it to be able to receive information of vocalizations that are going on in the region, and then it comes to the surface and can ping that information to back to the home base, in this case Woods Hole. And this is actually a glider flight, I think we call them, that happened this past spring, so from December until April 20th, and it ended down near Cape Cod Bay on April 20th. And what you're seeing for the different colors are right whale. Yellow is possible detections of right whales, and red is definite. And so again, this would have been in December. So exactly, you know, we could go back and sleuth this out, but exactly when the right whales were there. And obviously this is quite far offshore, although maybe that's getting a little bit closer. So, and then obviously around Massachusetts, a fair population. NOAA and DMR deployed this past spring acoustic monitoring buoys up and down the Maine coast. Again, these are not providing information in real time, but we'll go back out and download the information and have a good better information about where right whales are, or if they've been there. And again, someone pointed out, if they're not making noise, and of course we're not going to know that they were there. So there is that level of uncertainty. And then the last thing is that I actually helped get together some collaboration between NOAA and Navy, which is happening now, but actually this work was already happening at Northeast Fisheries Science Center, to figure out how to use observations of where we know whales are. And so this is like an aerial image of a whale. It's pretty hard to see. And then these are satellite images. And so if we know a whale is there, can we train computer systems to detect in the satellite imagery where the whales are? And the beauty of this, if we can get it working, is that we can then be looking for whales, and particularly right whales, in a much larger area. Because right now we don't know, maybe they're going to Iceland. And there actually was a story about one that was sighted in Iceland, or, you know, going way offshore. I mean, we just don't know. And so this is going to enable us to look at a bigger field than you can see with overflights. And this is interesting. This is actually, you can find through the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. So this is like a crowdsourcing of where people, NGOs, scientists have seen right whales, goes into this mapping software, and anyone can go look at that. And this is a screen capture of where right whales have been sighted since January 2020. And then you can drill down and look by month. Obviously a lot off Cape Cod, a lot in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then obviously some still coming up into the Bay of Fundy. So just note. So finally, a couple of additional ideas that bubbled up while I was talking to people. And this, can't remember where this idea, but an idea that's been around for a long time: fish less traps. So currently with the lobster license in Maine, you can fish 800 traps. With a full license. One idea is to, okay, let's reduce the number of traps that you can fish. And some fishermen said they might be willing to fish less traps, but only if they're required to do so, obviously. Less traps actually doesn't mean less end lines. So depending on the number of traps you have on a trawl, or maybe how you're fishing in the coastal area. If now you're worried because you can only fish 400 versus 800, and you're like less certain about where lobsters are, because there is sort of overall some less certainty. The fishing has changed, bottom line. Fishermen may actually, instead of having 5 traps out, maybe they'll split it now, and they'll have 3 here and 2 here. Well, now we have 2 end lines instead of 1. So just note that kind of the downside, I guess, of fishing less traps, but not knowing where the fish are. There were implied that the lobster fishery is not very efficient because we have so many traps out, and lobsters may be caught up to 7 times before they reach the legal size. That's a lot. That's a lot of extra fishing effort. But at least one person noted, but if we reduce the number of traps and the number of bait and the amount of gas and the number of boats, even perhaps, that's having ripple effects on the economy. And there's also a very clear idea out there that this would also mean less bait in the ecosystem, and maybe one of the reasons that we have so many lobster out here is because we're feeding them through our traps. So last idea, I believe, one fisherman offered the idea, why don't we, in the offshore in particular, maybe 12 miles out or 6 miles out, why don't we all, instead of fishing 2 end lines on our trawls, just fish 1 end line? And now, like, just like overnight, we would have half the number of lines, vertical lines. So interesting idea. I then went to other fishermen, because that fisherman was early in the time, so I had an opportunity to talk to others. What fishermen said, I don't know. I mean, I want to have the option with these long track trawls to be able to haul from either end, depending on the tide, and maybe one buoy's gotten pulled over under by the tide. I can still find the other buoy. So does it now change the number of times that I have to like go searching for my gear, perhaps grappling for my gear because I can't find the buoy? Definitely could be a problem. The feeling was, because now, especially in those areas where you have 2 end lines, that if you only had 1 end line showing where the beginning of the trawl was, but you didn't know what direction it was going, then we'd have a mess if everyone's setting their trawls over each other. And they do set their trawls over each other. I did hear stories of that from a number of fishermen. So it's happening already. But would it get worse with this? Unless in a, let's say by zone, you said, well, everyone's gonna set their trawls on this angle, or this direction, and here it's everyone in this direction. But there didn't seem to be a strong feeling that people are actually gonna follow that, because of course they're trying to fish and they're trying to be a little bit secretive about their fishing. So, and so, yeah, what if one buoy gets pulled under? So, but interesting idea. So now we come to our last question, which is, which approach would you recommend? And you can choose as many as you like. So portable high-tech ropeless systems, trawling up, stop lobster fishing altogether, manage differently by region, which requires knowing where the whales are, fish only 1 end line, reduce number of allowed traps per license, other. And if you choose other, we'd love it if you would, either in the chat box or the Q&A, tell us what your other is. Voting is open. All sorts of, ooh. Yeah. I mean, this is why there's so many options on the table. Looks like everyone, a lot under ropeless and manage differently. Glad to see no one's stopping. All right. Well, I think we've got just about everybody, probably. Oh, a few more. Ropeless, different by region, fishing the end line. Yeah, so I'd like to hear who the other, we had a couple in the other, so that's cool. Yay, all right. Well, thanks for listening. And I think my last slide is a shameless plug for the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries. And I believe that, Carla, you're going to open up the Q&A, or maybe tell people how to do that.
Yes, okay, so down on the bottom of your screen, there's a chat option as well as a Q&A option. It's easiest for me to see everything at once if you type your question into the Q&A. And we've got one who is already loaded. A question here from David Reed-Miller. Great talk, Libby, regarding the passive acoustic tracers that DMR has set out. What is their range, both X and Y as well as depth? And it seems like a cost-effective way of getting location information of the whales if the range is adequate, deployment coverage enough, and how often do you need to go out to them to download the data?
David, way too long a question. And actually one that I don't have an answer to. And I'm hoping maybe some of the Maine DMR people are on and can provide that.
I was just going to say Erin Summers was connected earlier, and she may have an answer. I don't know if you want to.
They could chat
that to me, Erin. That would be great.
David, also, I think I got that map off of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center website, I think, or maybe it was the DMR one. So just heads up that there's probably a web page there that describes all that stuff.
So I have another question from Lori McCausland, and she's wondering, how are the seals doing in Maine?
Well, I'll leave that to you, Carla.
Oh, wow. I mean, we've got quite a few seals, I would say. I don't know. That's not my forte to stay on top of marine mammal stuff. But they're doing pretty well. And as a citizen, how can you help?
I've seen them this summer in places that I had not seen them. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Looks like they're doing okay.
Yeah, and yeah. And then as a citizen, how can you help the right whale? Do you have an answer to that, Libby, or suggestion?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm kind of a citizen in this case. So I would say keeping an open mind and listening to both sides, but yeah. Also, yeah, I don't know. That's I'm not sure what citizens are doing. Do you?
I think the best thing you can do is,
yeah,
as a citizen, is to be informed, and really try to understand as best you can. But right now there isn't much action on a citizen plate, I would say, other than there's been a lot of letters to the editor written in the past year in Maine newspapers around this issue, and so that's how I've mostly seen citizens participate.
I suppose if you're out and
Bob Stenick, we have a question from.
I said if you're out and you see one, you could provide information.
You could report one.
Yeah.
Yep. Bob Stenick, what is the current estimate of the number of right whale deaths that have been attributed to lobster fishing in Maine?
I think that's a point of contention, correct?
Yeah, it's pretty hard. We haven't had until this year, and not even in action yet, any sort of designation of gear particular to Maine. They could say this was lobster gear with the red gear marking, but we couldn't say whether it was Maine or Massachusetts or wherever it was. And then you can look at diameter of rope, but that also doesn't have a very like state specific or consistent way of identifying. So to say like with 100%, I think the number's 0. But there are some other debatable numbers about whether it could be. There's the possible attribution to Maine, and I think that number might be less than 5. And that's over 25, 30 years.
Yeah, I was looking at the website, again, the NOAA marine mammal website that talks about the unusual mortality events, and it actually tells you where the whales have washed up. That they're, I didn't see any actually that had washed up in Maine. That doesn't mean that they haven't been entangled in Maine, but they've been washing up in sort of Massachusetts South or Canada. And that was looking back again, probably to 2015, not the 25 years that Carl is talking about. But because there are stories of, finding entangled whales in Florida, and there's no lobster fishery down there, that it looks like they've dragged it. So they're big animals, and if they can drag it, they're going to drag it. So that's where uncertainty comes in.
Yeah. And I'll say we have a response from Erin Summers from the Department of Marine Resources. She said that the sound traps, this is to answer David's question, the first one, the sound traps were deployed at sites that DMR also sampled in 2010. They are retrieved and redeployed every 3 to 4 months to download data and refresh the batteries. They'll be out for a full year at this time. Their range is probably about 5 miles, but I would have to double check. The coverage is not wide enough in this deployment for use for something like dynamic management. But it would give us a place to focus efforts in the future where they could put a higher concentration or density of retrieval on listening stations. Okay. What is being done to monitor or control shipping traffic in the Gulf of St. Lawrence to protect the right whale?
So I know a little bit about that, but I noticed that there was at least one DFO person, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, who was signed up. So correct me if I'm wrong, just go ahead and chat in the thing. But in the North Atlantic right whale meeting that happened last fall, I learned that the Department of Transportation in Canada had a system for monitoring the shipping lanes now. And if a whale, I don't think it just has to be a right whale, but definitely right whales, but other whales as well, are detected in the shipping lanes, there immediately goes out a mandatory reduction in speed in the shipping lanes for some period of time. And I'm not sure, I think it's not just, a day, it's more like a week or something. But I don't know, Carla, if you know any more about that, or if anyone wants to chat in about that, but that and how protective that is, I don't know.
Yeah, I think last year it wasn't very protective. There was one major incident, but I think they're trying to retool that and figure out what the right timing after there's a sighting and implement an enforcement. But I don't know what they're doing this year. So from Robin Alden and Ted Ames, there are real implications to the increased cost of several of these options. It could test the small vessel owner-operator structure of the business. And when she says test, it means it could really be trying or hard for the small vessel business model. Do you have any comments on that?
No, I mean, I 100% was hearing that. That it would be trying even on the large vessels, but on the smaller size ones, for sure. I mean, it almost seems undoable at the cost now. But that's where I think if we could get some really creative minds, including the fishermen themselves, willing to think about solutions. Now, I know right now ropeless is sort of a bad word, and you bring it up and they're like, like, I don't even want to go there. I don't want to talk about it. But on the other hand, if you could get some creative people thinking about it, and if we think this is the direction that things are going, I'm not saying they are, but if they are, then, maybe there are some smart, lower cost options out there, like the biodegradable twine concept, really inexpensive, but, there are all sorts of issues related to that about knowing where the traps are and, et cetera. So no, I hear you, but.
The next one, also other aspects of the trawling up options would be to consider the weight for the whale to drag more traps with them if they now are dragging 20 or 30 traps. Has this come up with whale scientists, or did you hear any of this in your fisherman interviews? Trawling up will also have implications for the size of the vessels that can fish that way.
No, I was hearing about all of that, and additionally about that, not only that you'd have 30 traps, but anchors, like bigger anchors on the end. So it's like weight. I mean, weight, WEIGHT. But the other idea that's sort of mirrored related is the idea of adding in the weaker link, and I didn't go into all of that, that would be part way down the line, so that if you did have this massive weight on the bottom, hopefully the whale's entangled above the weak link and can pull away from it. But I agree. I mean, there's lots of issues, and I could have gone on for days about the trawling part of it, but I just tried to like cut it down. But yeah, no, and the size of the boat, and what rope are they using now, and etc. So, and the safety of it, like breaking and hitting them in the face and hurting the fishermen as they're actually trying to haul them. So there are a lot of issues.
So we've got a couple other, I've moved over to the chat section here. We've got Tara Bamford is asking, what are the next steps? Do you want to cover that, Libby?
For me or for in general?
I think in general, probably, because we know for you it's not much, but
maybe you want to answer that, Carla.
This isn't your day job.
Yeah. Carla's the chief scientist, so she knows. She's the one who gave me so much information in the beginning. So I don't know if there are these legal suits, and there's so much for next steps. Why don't you answer that?
Essentially, the next steps, Tara, are we're currently in a federal court ruling and remedy process. So we're both parties, the defendant and the plaintiffs in the case, have offered their remedies and their comments regarding remedy, and we haven't heard back. I think that July 10th was the due date for those reports, and we haven't heard from the federal judge yet what he is going to deem as the remedy. So the current, or I should say a concurrent process, is the NOAA rulemaking and the development of the biological opinion of the status of right whales for the Endangered Species Act. And that is due to mature and be out in the spring of next year. And rulemaking going through, so NOAA is developing a rule from that whole process that they engaged in last year. And the big question is, will the judge put in an injunction on the fishery until that rulemaking happens? Will the judge decide on his own remedy before then, or will he defer to the currently ongoing process that NOAA has been doing? And we should probably I think those rules would be due early summer and would go out to the public comment process, and I think earliest in action might be the September of next year. Those are the next steps in the lobster whale piece. I don't know about next steps in the overall whale conservation process. So we've got Libby. I live in Stonington. What is the practical experience of Stonington's lobster people with seeing right whales in our region?
Well, that would be me, although I've never seen a right whale. I'm one of those who have never seen I've never seen a whale, period, in the Gulf of Maine, but I also don't go beyond the islands here. So what was the question exactly? It was, what is my...
just like people who live and fish out of here, how often have they seen right whales?
Well, that was one of the answers that I provided. No one. So lobstermen have seen whales, and almost every one of them would say, yeah, I see fins and minke whales and sei whale. Like, I see humpbacks, I see all the other whales, but I've never seen a right whale. Now, maybe they didn't know it was a right whale, so there could be that confusion, but it could also be that they haven't, because there are so few. But yeah, no, folks have definitely seen sea whales and sharks and other things.
Thank you. So Andrea Perry is asking you to go back to the slide that had the NOAA crowdsourced info for gear.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Was that gear location or was that whale location?
That was, so I didn't understand that totally at first, but it actually is gear location. So as I said, one of the really complicated parts about developing a ropeless system is developing the technology that's tracking the traps, not just where they're deployed, because lobstermen can do that themselves, but where they are. And because they might move, and that way the lobstermen actually have real-time information about where their traps are. So this is an effort to get other people involved in looking for what is out there that might be redeployed towards this particular topic. Yeah. And NOAA is working with a company to do that yet too.
Okay, so I've got one last comment. So from Richard Nelson, who's a fisherman, and he said, isn't it difficult? What?
Hey, Richard. I know him.
Isn't it this when they can't officially acknowledge climate change? And why isn't climate discussed as part of the solution?
You, Richard.
Yeah, good point. I agree. I mean, I'm on the panel to write the next report for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so I completely agree with you. But yeah, politics are politics, and sometimes you have to work it from whatever angle works for the most number of people. And I don't have a better answer than that, I don't think.
Yeah, I think Richard's touched on one of the greatest frustrations from the lobster industry, is that climate isn't part of the solution set.
Although we have in Maine
So
a very progressive governor with a climate council, and so Maine is pretty progressive on the topic.
Yeah. So I've got one last comment again from Tara. I think this is the last one, asking us about what's our organization's role in the next steps, and is there any collaborative effort for a resolution? So I think Libby, I'll just take this one.
Yeah.
Libby had identified that there's the North Atlantic large whale take reduction team, and they met for nearly a year and it's a collaborative process that had multiple stakeholders. They've met 3 or 4 times to make different stages of whale conservation measures over the past 20 years. And they met just all through 2019, 2018, 2019. And it went to litigate. The 3 environmental conservation groups lodged the complaint against NOAA for basically not doing enough soon enough. So that lawsuit came in at the same time as the whale take reduction team was having their meetings. So these are kind of like competitive and conflict processes. There was a long-standing collaborative effort that basically has been stalled. It reached its point, and then the lawsuit has kind of like concurrently been going on in its process. So there has been a collaborative effort. And I wouldn't say it's entirely failed, but it was challenged. And now litigation has basically got everybody who worked on the collaboration standing back to stay continued, or stay tuned and to be continued. Okay, that is, I think, the end of our questions, and that's the end of our time slot. So I wanted to thank everybody for attending, and also for your great questions. And thank you very much, Libby, for a great talk.
Bye, everybody.
I also want to remind everybody that our next Lunch and Learn is about aquaculture, inshore aquaculture in Maine, and particularly kind of around the Stonington area. And that's August 28th. Please, same bat channel, same bat time. Thanks.